In the quiet village of Nambai, a young woman named Lerato was in the kitchen, carefully cooking her husband's favorite stew. She had always tried to be a good wife, hoping her love would soften Galani's temper. That night, as she placed the meal in front of him, her heart beat with hope. But the moment Galani tasted it, he spat it out and shouted that it was too salty. Before she could even speak, his eyes filled with rage. Then, in a moment of cruel madness, he grabbed a pot of boiling oil and threw it at her. The hot oil burned her face and hands, her skin bubbling and peeling as she screamed in pain. Her cries echoed through the village, but no one came. The neighbors heard everything, but they stayed behind closed doors, too afraid to help. Lerato fell to the floor, crying and shaking, her skin on fire, her world broken. The man she trusted, the man she loved, had turned into her nightmare. She reached out for help for anyone, but there was only silence. Galani stood over her, cold and proud, as if her pain meant nothing. That night changed everything. It wasn't just the burns that hurt Lerato. It was the betrayal, the fear, and the lonely silence of people who chose to look away. That dinner, meant to bring them together, became the moment that shattered her life into pieces. Lerato lay on the floor, her skin burning, her heart shattered. But Galani wasn't finished. As if burning her wasn't enough, he grabbed her by the arm and dragged her outside like garbage. Her feet scraped the ground, her body limp, too weak to fight back. The pain was everywhere, in her skin, in her bones, in her soul. Galani didn't care. He pulled her all the way to the edge of the village and threw her down near the dump, a place where people threw away old food, broken things, and trash. That's where he left her, as if she was nothing. He looked around to make sure no one saw him, then walked away, wiping his hands like he had just taken out the trash. The next day, he told the village that Lerato had run away in shame. Some believed him. Others didn't care. No one came looking for her. Lerato lay there, broken and barely breathing. Days passed like slow poison. She couldn't cry anymore. She couldn't scream. Her body was weak, her face unrecognizable, but somewhere deep inside, her heart still held on. And then a miracle. A nun from Loquesa mission, on her way to Tunduma, happened to pass by. She spotted the fragile shape lying by the dump and rushed over. When she saw Lerato's burned skin and empty eyes, she didn't ask questions. She wrapped her gently in a blanket and whispered, "You're safe now." The nun didn't tell anyone. She took Lerato quietly, risking everything to help her. They traveled through the night, bumping down dusty roads toward the city. In Tunduma, the nun brought her to a small clinic. There, Lerato was treated by kind hands, by people who didn't look at her with fear or pity, but with care. It was the first time she had felt safe in a long, long time. As her wounds were cleaned and her bandages changed, her heart began to beat stronger. She wasn't sure what the future held, but she knew one thing. She had survived. And somewhere deep inside her, something was still burning, but now it wasn't pain. It was the beginning of fight. Years went by in the city of Tunduma. Lerato spent most of her time in the hospital, going through one painful surgery after another. Doctors did their best to heal her burned skin, but the pain was still there, not just on the outside but deep inside her heart. Every time she looked in the mirror, she didn't just see the scars on her face. She saw the night that changed her life. She remembered Galani's anger, the boiling oil, and the way the people in her village stayed silent. Some days she wanted to give up. The world had taken so much from her. Her beauty, her peace, her home. But somehow, something in her refused to break. To pass time between treatments, Lerato picked up a needle and thread. At first, she just sewed small pieces of cloth together. It helped distract her from the pain. Slowly, those small pieces turned into patterns, and those patterns turned into clothes. Her hands, though scarred, moved with care and love. She would sew late into the night, sometimes forgetting to eat, pouring all her emotions into the fabric. One day, a kind social worker at the clinic noticed her work. She asked if she could try selling one of the dresses in the local market. Lerato agreed, though she didn't expect much. But when the dress sold, and someone came back asking for more, a spark lit up inside her. For the first time in years, Lerato felt a small joy. Not just because someone liked her dress, but because she had made it. With her own hands. She had created beauty from pain. That moment changed something deep within her. It wasn't just about sewing anymore. It was about rising. About rebuilding. She still had nightmares. She still had scars. But now she also had purpose. The little girl who once cried alone in the dark was starting to dream again. Slowly, gently, Lerato was stitching her life back together, one thread at a time. Lerato looked at herself in the mirror one morning and saw more than just scars. She saw strength. She had survived the worst pain. And now she wanted to start a new life. A life with a new name, a new purpose. She chose the name Naledi, which means star. She wanted to shine, not just for herself, but for every woman who had ever been hurt, broken, or forgotten. With her new name came a new dream. She started Firethread Couture, a fashion brand made for burn survivors like her. Her designs were not soft and sweet. They were bold, raw, and powerful. Every dress, every stitch told a story of pain, strength, and survival. Some pieces had sharp cuts, others had patterns shaped like flames or scars. She turned her wounds into art. At first, people didn't understand it. Some said it was too much, too different. But Naledi kept going. She worked day and night, using every coin she earned to buy fabric, thread, and tools. She also hired other women who had been through abuse, giving them jobs, hope, and healing. Within just 3 years, her brand caught fire, not just in sales but in hearts. People began to notice. At Mzansi Fashion Week, Firethread Couture shocked the runway. Models with scars walked proudly in her clothes. The crowd rose to their feet. Naledi became one of the breakout stars of the event. But fame was never her dream. Her goal was justice. Not just for herself, but for every girl who had been silenced. She wanted to prove that beauty doesn't come from smooth skin or perfect faces. It comes from fire, from surviving, from rising again and again. Firethread Couture was not just fashion. It was a revolution. And Naledi, once thrown away like trash, now stood tall, not as a victim, but as a voice. Back in the quiet village of Nambai, life went on like nothing had ever happened. Galani, the man who had once destroyed Lerato's life, now walked around the village with his head held high. He had remarried, choosing a quiet woman who never spoke back. To the villagers, he called himself a man of discipline, a strong leader who knew how to run a house. Many feared him, but no one dared say a word. Galani had money now. He had started a cassava business that was growing fast. What no one knew was that the money he used to build that business was stolen. Money he had secretly taken from Lerato before throwing her out like trash. He had emptied her small savings, every coin she had kept hidden. With that money he bought land, tools, and workers. And now, he stood proudly, calling himself a self-made man. People in the village whispered behind closed doors, remembering what he did to Lerato. But fear was stronger than truth. No one wanted to be the one to stand against him. They watched him from a distance, some with guilt, some with silent hate, but all with fear. Galani walked through the streets like a king. He believed Lerato was gone forever, dead and buried in some forgotten place. He never looked back. In his mind, he had erased her. To him, she was just a mistake he had covered up long ago. The village, still under his shadow, remained quiet. The same church that once heard Lerato's screams never spoke of that night. Time had passed, and with it, truth had been buried. But what Galani didn't know was that the past he tried to kill was not gone. It was healing. It was watching. And it was coming back, not in silence but with fire. While Galani celebrated his fake success, thinking the world had forgotten, he didn't realize that far away, the girl he burned was building something far greater than revenge. She was building a storm. Years had passed, and Naledi had grown stronger, wiser, and more powerful. She no longer looked like the broken girl who once cried in the dark. Now, she moved with quiet fire in her heart. But she never forgot Nambai. The village that let her suffer in silence. The place where she was thrown away like trash. She knew she would return, but not with noise or anger. She would return with strategy. Secretly, under a fake name and hidden company. She started buying land around Nambai. Piece by piece, farm by farm. She took control of the land Galani once bragged about. No one knew she was behind it. They just saw new buildings rising, training centers, workspaces, and homes for women. But these weren't ordinary places. They were safe spaces, built for single mothers, widows, and women who had suffered in silence, just like she once did. Naledi gave them jobs, skills, and dignity. She didn't need credit. She sent anonymous donations to the same church that once closed its doors to her cries. She even paid for the children's school fees in the village, quietly, without anyone knowing who was helping. Slowly, the village began to change, but they still didn't know who was behind it. Then came the final move. She planned a grand event, a huge festival celebrating women, culture, and growth. Invitations were sent to everyone, including Galani. It was all part of her plan. He had no idea what was coming. He saw it as a local party, a chance to show off. He didn't suspect that the girl he believed was dead was now pulling every string behind the scenes. Naledi didn't need to yell or fight. Her revenge wasn't loud. It was silent, strategic, savage. She was coming home, not as a victim, but as a queen. The big day finally arrived. The entire village of Nambai was buzzing with excitement. Colorful decorations hung from trees, music filled the air, and people gathered for the Festival of Light. A grand celebration unlike anything they had ever seen. No one knew who had planned it, but everyone came. Even Galani stood near the front, proudly dressed, thinking he was an honored guest. He smiled and waved, unaware of what was about to happen. As the sun set, the music stopped. The lights slowly dimmed. A large screen lit up, and silence fell over the crowd. Then, a video began to play. At first, the screen showed fire. Then came the image of a burned face, swollen and scarred. Gasps filled the air. A soft, shaky voice began to speak. It told a story of love, betrayal, and pain. It spoke of a woman who was burned by the man she trusted, who was thrown away like garbage, left to die near the village dump. The crowd stood frozen, eyes wide, hands over mouths. Some whispered. Some cried. As the story went on, the voice grew stronger. It told of healing, of rising, of building something powerful out of brokenness. When the video ended, smoke filled the stage. And then, from the smoke, stepped a woman dressed in a flowing gown that looked like flames, red, orange, and gold. Her face was proud, scarred, and beautiful. The crowd stared in shock. Then someone whispered, "It's Lerato." And the word spread like fire. "It's her. She's alive." Galani froze. His face turned pale. He couldn't speak, couldn't move. He watched as the woman he tried to erase stood tall in front of the entire village. Naledi, once Lerato, had returned. Not to beg, not to cry, but to show the world who she had become. And in that moment, with the crowd holding its breath and Galani trembling, the truth finally came into the light. Galani stood frozen, his eyes wide, heart pounding. The woman on stage, the one he thought was long dead, was not only alive, she was stronger than ever. And now the whole village knew. Whispers turned into shouts, people pointing, murmuring, piecing together the truth. Galani tried to keep calm, pretending he wasn't scared. He forced a weak smile and slowly turned to leave. But just as he stepped off the path, 2 police officers appeared in front of him. "Mr. Galani?" one of them asked. Galani looked confused, then nervous. "You are under arrest," the officer said firmly. "Fraud, theft, money laundering. You need to come with us." The crowd gasped again. Galani began to protest, but it was no use. The officers already had documents, papers with his name, records of the stolen money he had used to start his cassava business. Naledi had never filed charges for the burns, not once. She had let that pain stay in her past. But the money? The money he took from her, the money he used to build his fake empire. That was different. She had tracked every coin. She had quietly hired a lawyer and built a strong case, collecting evidence for years. She didn't shout or threaten. She just waited for the perfect moment. And now it had arrived. As the police handcuffed Galani, the crowd began to cheer. Some clapped. Some cried. A few even shouted, "Justice." Galani, red-faced and shaking, was dragged through the same streets where he once walked with pride. People turned away from him. The same neighbors who once feared him now saw the truth. And Naledi, she didn't need to say a word. She simply stood tall, watching in silence as the man who tried to destroy her was finally brought down. Not by anger, but by truth, patience and power. Even after Galani was arrested and taken away, Naledi knew her journey was not over. Justice had been served, but her mission was just beginning. She looked at the house where it had all started, Galani's old home, the same place where she had been burned and left to die. Most people would want to tear that house down and erase the memory, but not Naledi. She had a different plan. She turned that house of pain into a house of hope. With her own money, she rebuilt it and named it the Phoenix House, a shelter and training center for women who had been abused, broken, and abandoned. The same walls that once echoed her screams now echoed laughter, healing, and strength. She hired women who had survived violence just like her. Women who needed a second chance, not pity. They were now the ones teaching skills, sewing, cooking, running the center with pride. Women who had been hidden in shame were now walking boldly, helping others rise from their own ashes. The Phoenix House became a safe place, a powerful symbol that no matter how bad the past was, the future could still shine. Word of what Naledi had done spread fast. Her story made it into newspapers, magazines, even national television. People were shocked, not just by her survival, but by her strength, her grace, her fire. She was no longer just a fashion designer. She became a face of power, a voice for the voiceless, a symbol of what true healing looks like. Reporters called her the woman who turned pain into power, scars into strength, and fire into a crown. And Naledi, once left for dead, now walked through that same village, not as a victim, but as a queen. Months passed, and Naledi's name became known far beyond the village of Nambai. Her fashion brand, Firethread Couture, had reached new heights. She was invited to one of the biggest fashion shows in Africa, held in the beautiful city of Maputo. The lights were bright, cameras flashing, and people from all over the world had come to see the show. But all eyes turned when Naledi stepped onto the runway. She was wearing a long, flowing gown in fiery red, the same color as the flames that once covered her skin. The dress shimmered like fire, bold and fierce, just like her. Her scars were not hidden. She wore them with pride, walking with confidence and power. People stood up and clapped. Some cried. Reporters pushed forward, trying to get her attention. One of them finally asked, "Naledi, what would you say to the man who tried to destroy you?" She paused for a moment, then gave a soft smile. Her voice was calm, but strong. "Thank you," she said. "You lit the flame that forged a warrior." There was silence, then a wave of cheers. Her words hit deep. She wasn't just a survivor. She was a warrior, strong, elegant, and unshaken. That moment was more than a fashion show. It was a full-circle victory. The girl who had once been thrown away now stood at the center of the world stage, shining brighter than ever. And the fire that was meant to break her? It became her crown.